The war between humanity and the alien empire had raged for years. Humanity, pushed to the brink of extinction, had fought back fiercely. Earth's leaders had sent their best warriors to the farthest reaches of space to fight a battle they never asked for. Among them was Captain Elias Ford, a soldier who had seen the worst of the war. He had lost friends, family, and hope. His only mission now was survival. Captain Ford stood in the cold, dimly lit room of the Human Command Center, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been tasked with the most important operation of his career, the capture of Empress Valera, the leader of the alien forces. Known for her ruthless tactics and cold, calculating mind, Valera had been the mastermind behind the destruction of entire human colonies. The stories told of her cruelty, how she wiped out anyone who stood in her way. Ford had seen the damage. He had seen entire cities reduced to rubble, the lives of thousands extinguished in moments. He hated her. But as he looked down at the map of the alien empire spread out in front of him, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of uncertainty. There was a question that had been nagging him for days. What if the truth was different? He shook his head, trying to push the thought away. He had a job to do. Valera was a threat. She had to be stopped. The door to the room opened with a soft hiss, and 2 soldiers entered, escorting a figure in shackles. Captain Ford's breath caught in his throat as the woman stepped forward. Empress Valera. She was not what he had expected. The stories of her were filled with images of a towering, cold, and terrifying ruler. But standing before him, she looked nothing like the ruthless warrior he had been led to believe she was. Her tall, slender frame was draped in a dark cloak, but it was not the cloak of a conqueror. It was the cloak of someone who had been through battle, someone who had fought for her life and her people. Her face, though still stern, held a sadness that Ford had not expected. Her dark eyes, the color of storm clouds, met his with an intensity that made him uneasy. The stories had never mentioned this. They had never mentioned the pain, the exhaustion, the weight of leadership that seemed to hang over her like a shadow. One of the soldiers stepped forward to remove her shackles, but Ford raised a hand.
"Leave them alone,"
he ordered. His voice was steady, but inside, he was uncertain. The soldier hesitated but obeyed, stepping back. Ford turned his attention back to Valera. "You've caused a lot of suffering," he said, his words filled with the anger he felt inside. "Hundreds of thousands of people are dead because of you." Valera stood silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on him. "I didn't ask for this war," she said softly, her voice surprisingly calm. "I didn't ask for the suffering of either side. But it is the reality we are now facing."
Ford's eyes narrowed. The reality?
You've torn entire worlds apart. You've destroyed everything in your path. Valera did not flinch. "I didn't want to destroy," she said, her voice still steady. "I wanted to save my people. We were dying long before your people came into the picture." Ford frowned. "Save your people?" He couldn't understand. The Empress was supposed to be a villain, a conqueror, someone who thrived on war. But now her words made him pause. Valera stepped forward slightly, her gaze still fixed on him.
"You know nothing about us."
The war, the invasion. It wasn't our choice. We were forced into it. Ford clenched his fists, the anger rising again. "Enough of your lies." "You think I'll believe that? I think you'll listen," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You've heard the stories, but you haven't heard the truth." For a moment, Ford said nothing. He looked at her, trying to see the truth in her eyes. She was the enemy, the leader of the forces that had decimated human colonies. But something about her presence made him question everything he had been taught. She sighed, a deep, weary sound. "I didn't want to be the Empress. I never asked for the crown. But when my people were on the verge of extinction, I was chosen to lead. I didn't have a choice. Ford took a step back, his mind racing. This wasn't the enemy he had expected. This wasn't the heartless alien leader he had imagined. Valira continued, her voice softer now.
Our empire, once vast and strong, is dying.
We were once a peaceful race, focused on exploration and knowledge. But our resources began to dwindle, and we faced extinction. That's when the Galactic Order came into the picture. They promised us salvation, new worlds to conquer, new resources to claim. They told us we could survive, but only if we followed their rules. They said that we had to conquer your people, to expand our empire, or else we would die. Ford shook his head. So you just followed them? You destroyed everything to save yourselves?
We had no choice, Valira replied, her voice filled with regret.
We did what we had to do to survive, but it wasn't just about us. The Galactic Order controls everything. They control the stars, they control the fate of entire civilizations. They forced us into war with your people. They manipulated everything from the shadows. Ford's mind raced. He had always believed that the war was a simple conflict, humanity against an alien empire. But what if it wasn't so simple? What if there was a larger force at play, one that had been controlling both sides from the very beginning? Valira's eyes softened, and she looked down, almost as if ashamed. I didn't want to cause all this destruction. I didn't want to be the reason for so many deaths. But now I have to stop it. I have to end this war before it destroys everything. Ford stood there, stunned. He had spent so long fighting against the aliens, believing they were the enemy. But now, standing in front of him, was a leader who wasn't driven by power or greed. She was driven by survival, by the need to protect her people from forces far greater than herself. For the first time in years, Ford found himself questioning everything. Could the war be over? Could they stop the violence before it consumed both sides? He had no answers, but he knew one thing. He could not ignore what he had just learned. The Empress had removed her armor, not just physically, but emotionally. She had shown him the truth of her situation, the truth of the war. And now it was up to him to decide what to do with that truth. Captain Elias Ford sat in his command chair, the weight of the Empress's words still heavy in his mind. The cold, sterile room of the human command center seemed to press down on him, and he couldn't shake the image of Valira's face. Her eyes, filled with something he had never expected to see in an enemy, guilt, regret, and a quiet desperation, haunted him. She wasn't the cold monster he had imagined. Instead, she was a leader backed into a corner, trying to protect what little she had left. The walls around him seemed to close in, and for the first time he wondered if everything he had been fighting for was truly what it seemed. Was the war really just between two civilizations fighting for survival, or was there something deeper, something more sinister pulling the strings? Ford stood up abruptly, pacing across the room. His mind raced. The thoughts of his crew, his mission, the countless lives lost, all mixed in a whirlwind of confusion. He had been trained for this moment. He had been prepared to face the enemy and destroy them. But this was different. Valira had removed her armor, not just physically, but emotionally. She had let him see a side of her that no one had ever seen, and now he wasn't sure where he stood. He thought of the thousands of lives lost. He thought of the cities that had been wiped off the map by the alien forces, the memories of the battles, the explosions, the screams of his comrades, all flooded back in painful waves. He had lost so much, so many people. His brother, his best friend, he had buried them all. How could he even begin to consider what Valira was saying? How could he let go of everything he had fought for? A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. His hand instinctively reached for the gun holstered at his side, but he stopped himself. It was just a soldier, one of his crew. "Captain, the soldier said, stepping inside. "We've received a transmission from the Empress. She wants to speak with you." Ford's heart raced again. Valera? He had already spoken to her once today, but there was something about her presence that seemed to linger. He nodded, motioning for the soldier to leave. His mind was made up. He had to speak with her again, no matter what it took to clear the confusion in his mind. Minutes later, Ford entered the small chamber where the Empress awaited him. Valera stood by a large window, her back to him, gazing out at the dark expanse of space. Her posture was rigid, but there was a sadness in the way she stood, like she was carrying a burden that no one could understand. Ford took a deep breath, stepping into the room.
"You wanted to speak with me?" Valera turned to face him, her dark eyes locking onto his.
For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was a long, tense silence that stretched between them, thick with unspoken words.
"I know you're confused," Valera said finally, her voice quieter than before. "You've heard only one side of the story."
Your people have been fed lies, just as mine have. And now I've shown you the truth. But it's not enough, is it?
"You want more!" Ford didn't know what to say.
He had so many questions, so many things he didn't understand. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he admitted. "I've seen the destruction. I've lived through it. How do I look at you after everything your empire has done?" "I understand," Valera replied softly, her eyes not leaving his. "I don't expect you to forgive me." "I don't expect you to forget. But you must understand that I was not the one who wanted this war. I didn't want to destroy your people. I didn't want to kill your civilians." Ford clenched his fists, his anger flaring. "Then why did you do it? Why did your empire burn everything to the ground?" Valera's gaze softened, and for the first time, Ford saw the true weight of her emotions. "I had no choice. You have to believe me. The Galactic Order, the group pulling the strings behind the scenes, forced my hand. They gave us an ultimatum: conquer or perish." Ford stepped back, stunned. "The Galactic Order?"
"You mean someone else has been controlling both our forces?"
"Yes," Valera confirmed, her voice filled with quiet frustration. "The Galactic Order has manipulated both our civilizations for years. They wanted to weaken us, break us down, and then take control. They knew that the only way they could maintain their power was to keep us fighting each other, so they set the war in motion. They promised my people a way out, new resources, new lands. They told us we had to expand, to conquer, or else we would face extinction." Ford's mind spun. This was a twist he hadn't expected. For years he had believed that the war was a simple matter of good versus evil, but now, faced with the truth, it felt like everything he had been fighting for was a lie. "Why didn't you just tell us this from the start?" Ford asked. "Why keep fighting if you knew the truth?" "I couldn't," Valera said, shaking her head. "I couldn't reveal the truth. My people would have turned against me. They had already lost everything. If I had shown weakness, if I had shown that we were being controlled, they would have seen it as a sign of defeat. They would have turned on me." Ford took a step closer to her. "So you fought to protect them?"
Valera nodded.
"What?" "I fought because I had no choice. I thought if I could just win, if I could just keep my people alive a little longer, maybe we could figure out a way to stop the Galactic Order. But I was wrong. The war has destroyed everything. It's destroyed both of us." Ford stared at her, his mind whirling. He had always believed that the aliens were the enemy, but Valera's words were changing everything. She was a ruler, yes, but she was also a leader, trapped in a war she never wanted. And now here she was, showing him the truth. She wasn't the villain he had been taught to believe she was.
"I'm sorry," Valera said quietly. I didn't want this.
But now, I can't undo what's been done. Ford swallowed hard. His heart was torn. He had always been taught that enemies were just that, enemies. But now, standing before him, was someone who wasn't just an enemy. She was a person, a ruler, trying to save her people. She had made mistakes, yes, but she had also been forced into a position where survival was her only option. I don't know what to do with this, Ford admitted, his voice shaky. I don't know if I can trust you, but I can't ignore what you've said. I can't just walk away from this. Valera stepped closer to him, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. I know it's hard, but I'm asking for your help. Together, we might be able to stop the Galactic Order. Together, we might be able to end this war. Ford stared at her, his heart racing. For the first time, he saw a glimmer of hope, but it was fragile, like the thinnest thread holding everything together. He didn't know if he could trust her fully, but he also knew that if they didn't work together, both their races would be doomed. I'll think about it, Ford said, his voice barely above a whisper. But we'll need to move carefully. We can't let anyone know what we've learned.
Valera nodded, her eyes never leaving his.
Agreed. We'll take it one step at a time. Ford turned to leave, but he paused at the door, glancing back at the Empress. He had thought he knew the enemy, but now everything was uncertain. Could he trust her? Could he trust himself? He didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was clear. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. Captain Elias Ford stared out at the vast expanse of space from the observation deck of the human flagship. The stars stretched before him, infinite and cold, a reminder of how small his world was in the grand scheme of things. He had always believed that the war between humanity and the alien empire was one of survival, a simple matter of defeating the enemy. But now, everything had changed. The Empress had spoken the truth, and now Ford was caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He couldn't ignore what she had told him. The Galactic Order, the hidden force controlling both their civilizations, was the true enemy. And Valera, the leader of the alien empire, was no longer just the enemy he had been taught to hate. She was a leader trapped in a desperate struggle, forced to fight a war she never wanted. Ford had spent days pacing in his quarters, wrestling with his thoughts. His mind kept returning to the same question. What now? He had been raised to fight the alien invaders, to see them as monsters. Yet here was the Empress, offering him an alliance, asking for help to end the war. Could he trust her? Could he trust himself? The door behind him slid open, and he turned to find Valera standing there. She looked different now, without her armor, without the cold, distant air of a conqueror. She looked tired, as though the weight of the universe rested on her shoulders. Captain, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. We need to talk. Ford nodded, stepping aside to let her into the room. He had known this conversation was coming. The decision to work together had been made, but now, the real challenges lay ahead. They had to figure out how to proceed, how to convince their people to join forces when everything they had been taught told them the opposite.
What's the plan? Ford asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty that gnawed at him.
Valera hesitated for a moment before speaking. We need to make contact with the leaders of the Galactic Order. We need to show them that we won't play by their rules anymore, but we can't do this alone. We need your people to stand with us. If we don't, the Order will destroy us both. Ford felt a heavy weight in his chest. The Empress was asking him to do something unimaginable, to unite with the very people who had caused so much pain, who had taken so many lives. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw something that made him hesitate. There was no malice in her gaze. There was only a deep, soul-crushing weariness, the kind of exhaustion that came from years of fighting and losing. I don't know if they'll believe me, Ford said, his voice filled with doubt.
How can I tell them this? How can I ask them to trust you, to trust me? We don't have a choice, Valera replied.
The war is not just between us anymore. It's a war for survival. The Galactic Order wants us both to fall. They won't stop until they've destroyed everything. Ford looked out at the stars again, his mind racing. He had always believed in the cause, in the mission. But now, the lines between right and wrong were blurring. The truth was more complicated than he had ever imagined. He turned to face Valera again, his resolve hardening. We'll need to act quickly, he said.
I'll contact the leadership on Earth, but I can't guarantee they'll agree to this. They've always viewed the aliens as the enemy.
It'll take time to change their minds. Valera nodded, understanding the weight of his words.
I know.
But if we don't try, everything we've fought for will be lost.
The room fell silent as Ford considered her words.
It was a risk, an enormous risk, but for the first time he realized that the alternative, the endless cycle of violence, would be far worse. He couldn't continue down the same path of hatred and destruction. Not when there was a chance to end the war. Not when there was a chance to rebuild. I'll do it, Ford said, his voice firm. I'll talk to them, but we need to have a plan. We need to show them that this isn't just a truce. It has to be something they can believe in. Valera's eyes brightened with a flicker of hope. I'll help you. Together, we can show them that there's more to this than they think. The next few days were a blur of activity. Ford spent long hours communicating with his superiors, trying to convince them to listen to the truth, trying to explain that the war had been manipulated from the start. It wasn't easy. Many of the higher-ranking officers were skeptical, some outright hostile, but there were others who listened, who saw the same uncertainty that Ford felt. Meanwhile, Valera worked on her end, contacting her people and preparing them for the difficult task ahead. It wasn't just the leaders they needed to convince. It was their soldiers, their families, the entire population who had been conditioned to believe that humanity was the enemy. Ford and Valera spent more and more time together, strategizing, planning, and sometimes just talking. They spoke of the past, of the events that had led them to this point. Ford learned more about Valera's people, about their culture and history. She spoke of a time when they were peaceful, when they had explored the galaxy with wonder and curiosity, but that time had ended long ago, replaced by fear and desperation. Through these conversations, Ford began to see her not as the enemy, but as a person who had been forced into a role she had never wanted. She had not chosen to be the leader of an empire at war. She had not chosen to make the sacrifices that came with it. And now, with everything hanging in the balance, she was willing to risk everything to stop the destruction. It was in these moments of shared vulnerability that Ford began to understand the true cost of war. It wasn't just about the soldiers on the front lines. It wasn't just about the battles or the strategies. It was about the people, the families, the civilians, the leaders, who were all caught in the middle of a conflict they never asked for. A few days later, Ford received a message from Earth's leadership. They had listened, at least partially. A meeting was set to take place, one that would determine whether or not humanity would ally with the alien empire to defeat the real enemy. Ford knew this was his chance. It was their chance. The meeting was tense. The human leadership was divided. Some wanted to trust Valera, to believe her, while others remained firmly against any kind of alliance with the aliens. But Ford stood firm, presenting the truth as best he could. He spoke of the manipulation, of the Galactic Order's true motives, and of the need to work together to ensure their survival. It was a hard sell, but in the end, it worked. Slowly but surely, the human leaders began to see reason. They agreed to form an alliance with Valera and her people. The war was not over, but it was no longer just about two civilizations fighting each other. It was about something greater, something worth fighting for. As Ford left the meeting room, he felt a sense of both relief and dread. This was just the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, convincing their people, bringing them together, and fighting the true enemy. But for the first time, Ford felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could end this war. He met Valera in the corridor, her expression unreadable. She had waited for this moment as long as he had. "We did it," Ford said quietly, almost to himself. Valeria nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. "It's a start," she said, "but we have a long way to go." Ford looked at her, the leader of the alien empire, his unlikely ally. She was right. This was only the beginning, but it was a beginning that could change everything. For the first time, he believed that peace might be possible, and that was worth fighting for. The war had taken so much from both humanity and Valera's people. Captain Elias Ford could feel the weight of that truth with every passing day. The alliance he had reluctantly agreed to was no longer just a matter of survival. It was about rebuilding, about forging something new from the ashes of war. Yet, with each day that passed, it became clearer that the true battle was not the one against Valera's empire or humanity's forces. It was a much bigger threat, the one that had manipulated both sides, pulling their strings from the shadows, the Galactic Order. Ford had seen the destruction firsthand. The shattered cities, the broken families, the endless suffering. But he had also seen something else. He had seen how Valera's people had suffered just as much, if not more. The moment he had heard her speak of the Galactic Order, he had known that their war had never been about power, resources, or even survival. It had been a game for the Order, a way to weaken both sides before taking control. And now, they were both pawns in a game neither side had ever agreed to play. The situation was growing more desperate by the day. The leadership of both the human and alien forces had agreed to a temporary truce, but there was no illusion of peace yet. The soldiers on both sides remained skeptical, distrustful. There were still hardliners who couldn't imagine working with the enemy, even after everything Ford and Valera had shared. Ford paced in the dimly lit room of the human flagship, his mind spinning with the complexities of their situation. The meeting with the human leaders had gone better than he expected, but there was still a deep divide. The decision to work with Valera's people wasn't unanimous. Some leaders had only agreed because they knew the war couldn't continue without an end, but Ford knew the real work had just begun. The plan was to form a coalition, a united front against the Galactic Order. But the Order was no fool. They had seen the signs, and they would do everything in their power to destroy this fragile alliance before it had a chance to take shape. The next few weeks would be crucial. Ford had to make sure both sides were ready for the fight of their lives. He looked over at Valera, who stood by the window, her eyes fixed on the dark stretch of space. There was a sense of quiet determination in her posture. She had always been a leader, even in the darkest moments of the war. But now, the weight of the task ahead was clear. This wasn't just about saving her people or stopping the war. It was about preventing something much worse from taking over the galaxy. "We need to move quickly," Ford said, his voice breaking the silence. "The longer we wait, the more chances the Galactic Order has to stop us." Valera turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "I know. I've been in contact with my people. They're preparing for the worst. But the Order won't go down without a fight. We need to be ready for everything." Ford nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I've been speaking with the human leaders. They're hesitant. They want to believe in the truce, but they still see you as the enemy." Valera's eyes softened, but there was no anger in her gaze, just a deep understanding. It will take time for them to accept the truth, but the truth is all we have left. If we don't fight together, we'll both be destroyed.
Ford walked over to the communications panel and activated a secure channel to Earth.
It was time to call the leaders of the Human Alliance to action. The Coalition for Peace had been formed, but it needed to be solidified with action. With the realization that the true enemy wasn't alien forces, but the forces that had manipulated them all. The holographic images of Earth's leaders flickered to life on the screen, their stern faces appearing before him. The silence in the room was thick, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was the moment when everything could change, or when it could fall apart. "Captain Ford!" The voice of General Aldridge came through, his face hard as stone. "We've all heard your arguments, but we still need more proof. You want us to work with the enemy, to trust their leader, and expect us to just forget the damage done to our people?"
Ford took a deep breath.
He had expected this. He had been ready for it.
I know it's hard to believe, Ford said, his voice steady, but we're not facing each other anymore.
We're facing a much bigger threat, one that has been controlling both of us for too long. The Galactic Order isn't just a military force.
They're a shadow government that has been pulling the strings of both our civilizations. If we don't unite, we'll both be wiped out.
Aldridge scowled. I've seen the destruction.
I've seen what they've done. But this is treason, Captain.
You're asking us to turn against everything we've ever stood for. Ford's voice hardened.
No, General. I'm asking you to do what's right.
This isn't about loyalty to a single cause or nation, it's about survival. The Galactic Order wants to destroy everything we've built, everything we care about. We can't afford to fight each other anymore. The room fell silent. Ford could see the resistance in their eyes, the doubt that still lingered. But there was also something else, a flicker of understanding, a recognition of the truth. They didn't have much time. After a long pause, General Aldridge finally spoke. "We'll agree to your plan, Captain, but know this. If this alliance fails, we'll hold you accountable." Ford nodded solemnly. "Understood." The holograms flickered out and Ford exhaled, feeling both relieved and apprehensive. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. The hard part was just beginning. Valira stepped forward, her eyes steady. "You did it," she said softly. "You did it," she said softly. "Now we have to prepare. We'll need to gather our forces and strike quickly."
The Order won't give us a chance to breathe. Ford looked at her, a new sense of respect and understanding in his eyes.
She had been fighting for so long, carrying the burden of leadership, and yet she still believed in the possibility of peace. It was a belief that Ford had once shared, but had lost over the years of fighting. Now, for the first time, he felt that hope begin to stir again.
"We'll need to work together," Ford said.
"We'll need every soldier, every ship, every resource. The Order is stronger than either of us alone."
But if we stand together, Valira finished, her voice firm with conviction.
"We can win this!"
The next few weeks were a blur of action. The human forces began preparing for a joint assault with Valira's forces.
The alliance that had seemed so fragile just days ago was now beginning to solidify, as both sides worked together, exchanging intelligence, strategies, and resources. Ford and Valira spent countless hours in meetings planning their next move. It was clear that the Order would not sit idly by. They had already begun moving their fleets into position, ready to crush any hope of rebellion. The battle ahead would be their last chance. It was a battle that would define the future of the galaxy. Ford stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching as the combined fleet of human and alien ships moved into formation. He felt the tension in the air, the weight of what was to come. But he also felt something else, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Valira joined him on the bridge, her expression calm but determined. She met his gaze, and for a moment, they stood together, united in their purpose.
Are you ready?
Ford asked. Valira nodded. "We have no choice." And with that, the fleet moved forward, towards the final confrontation with the Galactic Order. It was time to end the war. It was time to reveal the truth.